Ready to get started?
Yeah.
Homework today.
Yeah.
What are you guys up to?
I don't know.
How's everybody doing today? Can one of you folks at home unmute and you know the story? Let me know if you can hear me or not.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so we had a quiz due last night, and that one was a written quiz. So do we have any questions about the quiz? I know we have a skeleton crew today, only 3 of us present, but that's okay. I wore this nice blazer for just the 3 of you. Crazy, right? I'm channeling my inner European. Okay. European professors always wear the blazer.
Yeah.
Usually when you go to Europe, Shikiponja, you're from Albania, right? Like, isn't this true?
Yeah. Yes,
European,
it's 100%.
yeah, except European professors, they have patches on their elbows, and then they also
Yeah,
wear.
they do. Yeah, especially Italians.
Oh, yeah, that's not. Yes, so I'm channeling my inner Italian professor, although I don't have cool leather elbow patches, and I'm not wearing jeans, but yeah. If you ever go study in Europe, it's a pretty cool opportunity. College is different over there than it is here, but it's always cool to see how other folks learn and to gain that experience. So I recommend it. So we had a quiz due. So anybody have any questions on the quiz? I'll open up the floor to you guys. Was it mid? Was it a no?
Better than mid.
Better than mid, yeah.
What's the term that we figured out? Better than mid.
Peak. Peak, yeah, it's peak. Yeah. I'm gonna open up the quiz. I asked my favorite question I think that I've ever asked on a quiz is the historical example. So I wanted you guys to provide a historical example of just something that you researched that was like affiliated with economics. It demonstrated an aspect of macroeconomics. And what I was seeing is some folks in my classes had answered like they just defined something, like they would define inflation and explain it to me. And I'm like, well, that's not a historical example. So they got another shot if they did that. No big deal. I want you guys to understand that macroeconomic principles are not just stuff that I make up. They are found in history. You can look and see how the laws of economics don't change throughout time. The only thing that really changes in this world are the people in the world, right? We live and then we live our lives, and then we have another generation that takes over after we leave. But year by year, the actual human experience is not really any different, right? So technology changes. Technology has been changing since our friend the caveman back way long time ago. But these days, we are the same kind of people as the people that lived a couple thousand years ago. Let me give you an example. I remember I read this letter one time. There was an Egyptian soldier in the Roman army, and he was stationed in Europe. And so if you guys didn't know, Egypt was a province of the Roman Empire for a while. And whenever a soldier joined the army, he was sent any which way around the empire, wherever the military needed him. And in those days, it happened to be in Europe. And so this soldier wrote a letter to his family. And in it, he had written to his mom and his sisters, like, hey, don't forget me. I'm in Europe. I've been gone for years, but I still love you. I miss you. Can you send me some stuff? I want to come home on leave and see you guys, but the army won't let me. Those Romans, you know. And it was funny because I was reading this and I was in the American Navy at that point, and a lot of my friends and I were taking a look at this letter, and it was the same stuff that we would say. You know, we missed our families. We were gone for years at a time. We would ask them to send us stuff, although it wouldn't be like, you know, stuff that the Romans would send each other. It would be like our PlayStation games and stuff like that, you know. But it was the same stuff. So the technology changes, but the human experience does not change. It was interesting to me. So just to give you guys a little bit of a personal story. So yeah, I talk about the Roman Empire quite a lot, I guess. The examples that you can get from the Roman Empire for all kinds of stuff are just really, 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 really impressive. I really love the Roman Empire's history because it's like a gold mine of information, not only about history, about military science, but also about economics, about governance and politics, stuff like that. Yeah. Did you know, Ryan, that modern New York City, so that's New York City in 2023, only uses 1/7 the amount of water that the ancient Romans used in their city of Rome? That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I told you that, didn't I?
Yeah.
I repeat myself so much, but
All the bathhouse.
all those bathhouses, yeah. And like, if you guys, this is how you tell if you have a good professor. If they repeat themselves like 500 times, then you should go on Rate My Professor and give them a good review. So, all right. So I was impressed with the quizzes. You guys are doing pretty good. I like the answers that I see. If I see something and it's not up to what I think it should be, I let you know, and then I give you a chance to correct yourself usually. So no problems there. I think everybody's doing pretty good overall. So if you guys don't have any questions, we'll move on to our lecture. But there's a lot of stuff I want to cover today. But I just want to remind you that I take questions as you have them. So go ahead and chime in if you do. All right. We're not going to go over the quiz though. I mean, it's a written quiz. You know, it's kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to answer each question as everybody wrote it. But there was some general stuff that I was looking for. Provide a good historical example and write about it. That was one of them. There was a minimum word count, and that's how I'm going to be structuring my quizzes from now on. There's going to be a minimum word count of 250 words for each response. Now, to put that in perspective, each question is a little bit over 100 words. So 250 is not a lot. All right. And the point with that was to get you guys to explain what you're writing instead of just make statements. So I was pretty happy with what I saw. So from now on, just pay attention to that. If you do not meet the 250 word minimum, you will not get points for that. You have to meet the minimum. So just keep that in mind. I'm not punishing you guys. I'm just encouraging you to write more. Okay, so on last Wednesday, we talked a little bit about, oh, if I'm remembering correctly, it was, I think, the business cycle. Yeah. My stenographer, you can let me know. We talked about the business cycle, and I told you all this stuff about the business cycle. And then I basically cracked the egg and made the omelet. I said, the business cycle is not real. It's not real, all right? The laws of supply and demand govern a lot of aspects of economics. So supply and demand are what we use to allocate resources. The business cycle doesn't affect economics that way. It's not something that actually has any determining power in any allocations of resources. This is something that we use to represent the economy as a whole, right? And I did say that we have kind of four components of the business cycle. We have expansions, which is when the economy gets bigger. We have recessions, which is when the economy shrinks. We have peaks, which is when the economy reaches its greatest expansion. And then we have troughs, which is when the economy reaches the limit of its recession. And intriguingly enough, even though all four of those things I just mentioned are found on the graph, they do not all mean the same thing. And what I mean when I say that is that expansions and recessions discuss economic activity. They are referring to different amounts of economic activity taking place. Troughs and peaks refer to the limit of time for each activity. So when the expansion ends, that's when you have a peak, right? So a peak is not necessarily measuring the same thing as an expansion. And the trough is not necessarily measuring the same thing as a recession. So even though they're obviously two different things, recession and troughs are not the same, obviously. They're actually two different categories. They're two different ideas that they're trying to encapsulate. So peaks and troughs are related, and recessions and expansions are related. But peaks and troughs are not related to expansions and recessions. They just show on the graph where expansions and recessions end. I'm referring to peaks and troughs. Kind of a weird idea, right? But how we do it in economics, a lot of these things are kind of weird. Okay, so that makes sense, Ryan? Yeah. And we have everybody at home. Everybody's following along pretty well, I hope, but no questions so far. We covered the business cycle. What else did we cover? We covered our friend Thomas Jefferson. He made a boo-boo in 1807. He pushed the Embargo Acts through the Congress, and then The year 1808, not a great year for the United States. We had the worst economy ever, I think. And it's because Thomas Jefferson had this brilliant idea where he would close off the economy. I told you the story. We were dealing with impressment in those days, and it was a big issue. The British were bullying us on the high seas. And so Thomas Jefferson thought, okay, if the British are kidnapping our sailors, they can't kidnap any sailors if there aren't any sailors in the first place, right? That was like that brilliant logic. And so he closed the economy off. He created a closed economy. Okay. Now, obviously, you can't go from having an open economy to a closed economy without some painful repercussions. And so that's what we had when we talked about the Embargo Act. We had an economic crash that really shrunk GDP by like half. It was crazy. So not so good. So that's what we talked about for our closed and open economic examples. Remember what an open economy is. It's just the world's economy and how every country that has an open economy relates to other open economies. There are different criteria that you kind of have to fill to be considered part of an open economy, where like you need to be in a country that borrows and lends money between other countries. So like the United States lends a lot of money to other countries, and we borrow a lot of money. We borrow a lot of money, actually, trillions, in fact, other countries. So that's part of it. Importing and exporting is maybe the biggest one. If you do not import and export, you are not living in an open economy. Any questions so far? Now, in our modern age, we don't necessarily find too many closed economies. It's like maybe North Korea might be the closest approximation you can find to a closed economy. And in other parts of history, countries would be considered closed. Like, for example, before North Korea, there was just Korea. And Korea, for most of its history, was referred to as the Hermit Kingdom. Hermit, like hermit crab. Hermit crabs hide in their shell. Korea hid within its borders. It was very, very isolated from the rest of the world, and they did not import or export. You could call that an example of a closed economy. Japan, before the 1860s, when, or I think it was in the 1850s or 60s, I can't remember. It was 1853 maybe, when Commodore Perry visited Japan. You know what I'm talking about at all? I think it was 1853. Maybe can you? Oh, you want to Google that for me? Yeah. When did Commodore Perry visit Japan? Was it 1853? I think it was either 1853 or 58. But basically, there was this guy named Commodore Perry, and he was sent over from the United States to Japan to convince them to trade with us. Japan at that point was a closed economy. They were very isolated. What year was it? 1853. All right. And so Commodore Perry showed up, and Japan opened up its economy. They actually had an industrial revolution in that country. A very interesting story. And it's a good historical analog, actually. So I'll tell it to you in a second. But basically, the short version of the story is that Japan's economy was closed, and it became an open economy, and they were able to industrialize for that reason. Okay. They benefited from something known as the ketchup effect. Did I mention the ketchup effect before? I think I did. Yeah. That's not ketchup like you put on French fries. That's ketchup like I'm catching up to you in the areas. So I did mention that. Yeah, they benefited from the ketchup effect. Okay. So anyway, Japan was not a wealthy nation in the 1840s. This was at the tail end of their isolation. And in 1853, I don't remember who the president was, James Buchanan maybe, but I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, this guy, Commodore Perry, was sent over to Japan in order to convince them to become an ally of the United States, open up their markets, and become a trading partner with us. And so Commodore Perry did, and he showed them his military might. He had cannons on his ship, and he told them, if you guys don't open up, well, then we'll bomb you. That's the way to get anything done, right? So Japan decided that and it was in their best interest. It was in the emperor's best interest, and the shogun actually in those days, to open up their economy and to join the international community. Now, the emperor came to power 15 years later in the Meiji Restoration, or Meiji, I guess is how you pronounce that word. But they benefited from the ketchup effect. They industrialized very quickly because they were able to take Western technology and use it for themselves. And it's interesting because technology costs a lot to develop, but somebody pays the cost, and everybody who doesn't pay the cost gets to just use the benefits of whatever was developed. So in America and in Western Europe, there was a lot that went into developing modern technology that the Japanese didn't have to worry about. They just bought the stuff and used it. So interesting story there. There's more to that story that's not really relevant to this course. I don't teach a history course in economics, so I won't get too deep into the weeds with that one, but that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the differences between an open and closed economy. You don't always need to find closed economies that are specifically related to countries, though, honestly. Closed economies don't strictly have to be economies for individual countries like North Korea or the United States, right? North Korea is the closest approximation we could probably find to a closed economy these days. And in the past, it was all of Korea or Japan, countries in like Africa, for example, or in South America before the arrival of the Europeans. These economies were closed. They didn't trade with anybody else, right? But in these days, there are still parts of the world where they're kind of isolated. It's really hard to trade with the people who live in these places. Like, for example, Appalachia. A lot of the poorest counties in the United States are found in the stretch of mountains in the East Coast area called the Appalachian Mountains. So, like places like West Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia, they're very poor because it's difficult to get there. The cost of doing business is very high. So the cost of economic development is very high because they're just in mountainous locations. It's hard to get to them. Same thing with islands, right? So countries in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, they're very far away. So it's hard to go to these places and sell stuff like PlayStations and shoes and make the same amount of money that you make here. We manufacture a lot of things in this country. And if I have to drive to the next town over to sell them, then I will. If I don't have to fly across the Pacific Ocean to sell my goods, if all my choices were just go next door or go around the whole world, I'm going to choose to sell my goods here. And that's the effect. That's the downside of living in these beautiful island countries, is that they're very far away from everything else. In fact, I think I read one time that if you sit on a boat in the middle of the open space in the Pacific Ocean, like west of Easter Island in the South Pacific, they call that like the doldrums, or like the big open ocean in the Pacific. The closest human beings that you can find are actually in space, on the space station up there. They're not on Earth. That's far away from everybody, right? So that's not where you want to be. That's not where I want to be. I like people. I already did the COVID lockdowns. I don't want to do that in the Pacific Ocean. My goodness. You know, I went to Iceland one time. This is country in the North Atlantic, and it's very, very beautiful, very stunning, very gorgeous. And it's also an island country, so they import a lot of things. They have to, because islands don't have robust economies. They don't have a lot of natural resources, right? And it's also really cold in Iceland, so you can't farm like you can in other parts of the world. So they have to import a lot of things. And I went to Subway, which is the restaurant, and I was going to use the Wi-Fi. I don't actually like Subway, okay? I just need the Wi-Fi. So I went to Subway in Iceland, okay? And I was just curious about how much a foot-long sub was going to be. And I couldn't even contain myself. My jaw dropped when I saw how expensive a sub in Subway is in Iceland. You want to take a guess at how expensive they are? Bucks?
$40.
$40.
That's insane.
2018, you were paying $40 for the sandwich. So that means no chips and drink, which is more money, right? It was not unusual for me in Iceland to be driving down the road. In Iceland, they only have one highway. It goes around the entire country, an island, you know. Driving on the highway, they have like a few rest stops and gas stations you can get food at. It was not unusual to see a burger and fries cost 50 American dollars. A lot of money, right? Now, it's crazy. How do they afford all that? And what the heck is the reason behind that increase in prices? Why is it that they have so much money that they have to spend? Why is it that things are so expensive in Iceland? Well, part of the reason is because their economy is set up as a redistributionist economy, meaning you pay a lot of money in taxes and then you make a lot of money through welfare, which is redistributed income for you if you're a citizen in Iceland. Now, on the flip side of that, it's also an island. So where are you going to get the lettuce for your Subway sandwiches if you're on an icy rock in the North Atlantic? You're certainly not growing it, right? Even though the soil in Iceland, by all accounts, should be very good soil. because it's volcanic. Volcanic soil is always really fertile, but it's too cold, right? So geography plays a part in that. If Iceland were like 6,000 miles to the south, maybe it would be very wealthy. Maybe they would have a lot of farmland there. You know, maybe it would be an island like La Guadeloupe. For you guys that love history like I do, the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, which it actually lasted for 9 years. I don't know if they call it the 7 Years' War actually, but it ended in 1763. And it was common practice for European countries, whenever they would conquer each other's territory, to actually give the territories that they conquered back to the people that they took the territory from. They viewed each other as peers. So like Britain and France, they did this all the time. They would fight wars and then they would give each other their stuff back. Like, yeah, I guess. And the GDP of this island, they call it La Guadeloupe, which is Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. The GDP of that island was greater than all of Canada. Canada being the big territory that was ruled by the French in those days. And the reason why is because they produced sugar on that island. Sugar being very lucrative. If you used sugar in the 1760s, you were rich. Okay? So are we tracking here? Sometimes geography plays a part. We have not arrived yet at my lecture on the geography of economics, but we will. That's one I have planned for like a couple weeks from now, and it's a good lecture. It's one of my favorites actually. Geography is very intriguing to me, and it plays a huge role in where resources are allocated. For example, do you know what countries you find diamonds in? Where are diamond mines? Do you have any ideas?
African.
South Africa, and then Russia and Brazil. Those are the three countries that you typically find a lot of diamonds in. Diamonds don't exist everywhere. Right? I can't go to my backyard in Colorado and mine some diamonds. They are found in abundance in Russia and in South Africa and in Brazil, but they're not found in abundance in Colorado. But you know what is found in abundance in Colorado? Gold. So you don't always get the same manifestation of abundance. You don't always get the same amount of resources everywhere you look. And it's true with diamonds. It's true with things like animals. Different animals survive in different places in better or worse ways. It's harder to raise crops in Africa where rainfall is inconsistent. Right? So I'll get to all that in the future, but right now I just want to impress upon you that geography is somewhat important. But when we're looking at the international economy, there's nothing inherently equal about anywhere that you live. And there's also nothing inherently equal about me and you. Nobody is equal to each other. In fact, nobody is even equal to themselves. If you look at your skill set from today and compare that to your skill set in 10 years after you complete your education and you start working and you gain some experience, in 10 years, your value that you contribute to the economy is going to be worth more, right? And that's not necessarily saying anything bad about you now. It's saying that you have a different accumulation of skills in the future. So you could take people from Japan and people from Uganda. And if they all have the same experience, if they all know the same trades, if they all understand the same things about their places in the world and they know the same business and they have the same skill set, if the people from Japan are 10 years older, they're going to make more money because they have 10 more years of experience. See how that works? So time is a factor. So there are a lot of different things that create inequalities. Right now, though, I'm going to talk about types of governance, the systems of governance that we use, and the role of government in an economy. And then I'm going to talk a little bit before I do that about purchasing power. Okay, so do you have any questions so far? All right, so let's go back to the example that I gave about Iceland and the sandwich in Reykjavik, the capital, that was like $40. So whenever I go from the United States to Iceland, our currency in this country is the US dollar. But in Iceland, they don't use the dollar. They don't actually even use the euro. They're not part of the Eurozone. They use Icelandic korans. That's their currency. It's a currency that's only found in Iceland. Okay. And one Icelandic koran is worth about 1 cent in the United States. But their prices are all listed in hundreds and thousands. So that means that if I want to buy something for $1, it's like 100 korans. And if I want to buy something for $10, it's like 1,000 korans. But the thing of it is that their prices are not low. All right. It's not like I can just take $10 to Iceland and I get to buy whatever I want because I have all these corins. It's not like I can go to the store and something costs three, like a bag of chips would be like 3 corins. A bag of chips is like 300, right? Their price level is roughly the same. So the amount of stuff that you have to exchange in order to get anything is actually higher in Iceland. Now, this relates to exchange rates a little bit. You know what the exchange rate is? Or do you know what an exchange rate is? An exchange rate is just basically the market rate for the trading of currency. So basically, if I go to Europe, Europe is a continent. It's not a single country, but in Europe they have the Eurozone, and countries within the Eurozone use the euro as their currency. And so I think it's like €1 right now is worth like $1.02, which means that you need $1.02 to make a euro. Shkipanja, what's your currency in Albania? Is it the lira?
We have lek.
What is it?
It's called lek in Albania.
Lek. Okay. Do you know how much you can get for a euro with your
For
currency?
€1 should be, now I haven't seen the currency, but should be like $1.20, which
Oh,
would
okay.
be €1 would be 100 lek in Albania.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
a
I
thousand
see.
lek.
I see. I see. Thank you. Yeah.
But in the coins, because we have coins, so that is 1,000 lek. It is written 100 lek there, like we say, like new lek. It's written 100, but it is 1,000.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
the currency was adjusted, huh? So they took like, okay, everybody has like 1,000, and then all they're gonna say is, okay, from now on, this means that everybody has one leg, something like that.
Yeah, everything that is written in Albanian lek, you have to add another zero. Because we
I see.
call it the old lek, and we use the new lek. And for example, €1 is 1,000 lek, but it is written 100 there, so 1 0 less. And you usually have to add 1 0 in everything when you do the exchange.
I see. I'd love to see that sometime if you want to come in and join us. I have foreign currency that I could.
So unfortunately, I don't live in Colorado. I live in Texas now.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and but I've lived there for 3 years. Like I am for 2 years here in Texas, and I've done 2 years in Colorado. So I decided to continue again there.
I see.
And, but I've brought here Albanian leg when I came, and I've left to my father-in-law. I don't know what he has done to them, but I gave to him.
I see. Well, it'd be good to have you, but if since you're in Texas, that's okay. Don't send us any in the mail. We don't want to get it lost, but it'd be cool to show everybody the foreign currency. I collect a little bit of foreign currency, and I think it's cool to see because foreign currency doesn't have the same value. Like I used to
Yeah,
live
my
in.
father-in-law collect currency. He likes that, and he is from different countries of the world.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, one of my favorites is the Romanian lei. I lived in Romania for a few years, and their currency is known as.
I've seen Romanian lei.
Oh yeah, it's neat. It's the currency is in the United States. Currency is usually it's always green, but
This is easy here. Like you don't get confused at all. When you come for the first time for foreigners, it's not hard. While if you go in my country and you try to use our lek, it's so hard because you can't adapt. It's written different, and you have to give more than that. So it's a little.
right, it's
We say
confusing.
1,000 and you give 100 to them. That is written on the paper. So for foreigners, it's hard there to adapt with the leg.
Right, right. That's the truth. And the way that we determine, so let me back up a second. Foreign currencies are usually different sizes, actually. That's something that you find around the world is that the larger the actual denotion, the larger the amount of the currency represents, the larger the bill is. So like a €1 bill is like this, but a €50 bill is a little bit bigger. Same thing with like dollars are all the same size, but in Romania. So you start out with a one single leu, which is just really small. And then as you get higher and higher in your denotion, it becomes literally larger, and they all have different colors. It's kind of neat. So when we'd want to go to another country, obviously I can't really spend my dollars in other countries very much. it's like we talked about it. You're not really allowed to take more than some amount of money from one country to the next. Like, it's not legal for me to enter into the United States with more than like 10 grand in euros. And so what happens is that I need to exchange my money. I need to go to a bank and I give them dollars, and in exchange they give me euros. So if I give them $102, they'll give me 100 euros, something like that, right? And the way that we figure out how much each currency is worth relative to each other is by using something known as an exchange rate. Exchange rates are figured out with money markets, really. So you compare currencies and you figure out, okay, average prices between currencies are, X and Y. And then when we figure out the amount of money that you need to buy money in a country, we will call that the rate. Pretty easy to convert, but I don't. Oh, is this the Albanian lek there? Very cool, very cool. So basically exchange rates just kind of show you how much currency you need to go to another country and have the equivalent amount of currency. But that's a little bit different than something known as purchasing power parity. And it's often abbreviated as PPP. You can say that as much as you want. It's pretty funny. It is PPP. It's a weird thing to say. So purchasing power parity, a little bit different from currency exchange, actually. It's a little bit more of an accurate measure of the actual amount of stuff your money can buy, because you're not buying foreign currency with your money. Whenever we're talking about an exchange rate, for example, you're buying stuff. Now, purchasing power parity is often referred to as the Big Mac index. Anybody have any idea why that's called the Big Mac index? It's a pretty neat story, but if you know, I'll give you a shot. Still writing? Good. Okay, so there's this idea that everything that is made in different countries is made with different inputs. Like I told you, it's a lot cheaper to buy tomatoes one town over than it is for me to go across the Pacific Ocean to buy tomatoes. So if I make a Big Mac, I don't know what is on a Big Mac. I don't eat them, but what is it like? Hamburger, lettuce, tomatoes, maybe pickles.
Yeah.
Is there like a ketchup
Sauce.
sauce?
Big Mac sauce.
Big
That's what they call it.
Big Mac sauce. I like that. Maybe I'll try one. So you need these inputs, right? And so it's a lot cheaper for me to get the inputs using locally grown ingredients than it is to go around the world and find ingredients from some other location. But the thing about McDonald's is that you can find McDonald's in like 150 countries around the world or something like that. Like, it's a lot. I think they don't have McDonald's anymore in some places, but really, if you want to go eat at McDonald's, you can generally find one in the country that you're in. All right. It's pretty hard to be in a country and not find McDonald's. Okay. McDonald's also sells the Big Mac. And generally speaking, you want to look at the amount of money it takes to buy a Big Mac and see how much it costs for that McDonald's to produce that Big Mac to really see what it is worth. Okay. So think about it like this. If I'm in China and one Big Mac costs like 26 RMBs or 24 RMBs, how much is a Big Mac in America? Is it like $4?
Something like that.
All right. So if a Big Mac is $4 and in China, a Big Mac is 24 RMBs, that means if I come from China to here, I would need to bring with me 24 RMBs to exchange to $4 to buy a Big Mac. That has nothing to do with the amount of currency that I would need to buy another piece of currency. We're not figuring out the exchange rate. It's the actual piece of food that you want to buy, the actual amount of currency that you need to make that same equivalent value with another nation's currency. It gets tricky. It's a tricky concept because it's like, why doesn't that have anything to do with an exchange rate? And they're very similar, they're very closely related. But purchasing power parity takes into account everything in an economy. So it's like, if I have a currency rather, with a very strong purchasing power, that means I don't need a lot of it to go somewhere and buy the same stuff that I buy here. Like in America, like if I am buying a Big Mac for $4 and then I go to China, then I would need 26 RMBs to buy a Big Mac, but the exchange rate might be, 6 to 1, 5 to 1, something like that. And with that $4, now all of a sudden the amount of money that I'm spending to buy a Big Mac is lower over there. I don't need the same equivalency in currency. So purchasing power is a different measurement of the strength of your currency. Okay. It's kind of like I said, it's tricky. It's not always a clean calculation. So easiest way to remember this is that exchange rates are basically determined using financial markets, where like if I want to take dollars and go buy a bunch of British pounds sterling, that means I'm competing with other people who have dollars who want to buy that same amount of pounds sterling. And so exchange rate is determined by the supply and demand of different currencies. But purchasing power actually is a comparison between the wealth of two countries. It's like showing you how much you can buy. Like if I come to China, if I go to China with my American dollars and I have 26 American dollars, I can buy, or 24 American dollars, I can buy 6 Big Macs instead of, just the one if I had 24 RMB. All right. So are we good on purchasing power? Following with PPP and with exchange rates? Sound fair? All right. So I talked a lot earlier in the semester about the role of government, and I know that you guys think I live in my basement and I connect like dots on a map and have all these conspiracy theories about the government. And I told you guys actually I don't have a basement, so that can't be true. But no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just talk a lot about the government because you cannot have an economy with no government. You need to have an economy and a government working together. Otherwise, you have not. Government and an economy, a government and an economy are inextricably intertwined. They have to be. The Western Roman Empire fell in 479, or I should say AD 479. I don't know if you knew this, but when you're talking about a year after zero, AD goes in front of the numbers. So it's AD 479. Don't know if you knew that. So when the Western Roman Empire fell in 479, the people of that part of the world found out real quick that you need to have government in order to have an economy. Their economies collapsed. They didn't have any government protecting their property rights. They didn't have any government providing any legal framework within which their economy could function. And so, yet again, it's the Roman Empire giving us a great example. I'm all for it. So it's interesting. You need to have a government in order to have an economy. The question, though, one of the main questions in all of economics is, what is the role of government? What is the right amount? You guys are very fortunate to be taking this class because you get to explore that question quite a bit. What is the right amount of government? It's a question that has dominated economics for centuries, I bet. How much government is too much? How much is too little? What do we use it for? What is its role? So I've talked a lot about government before, but for today, I'm going to lecture on the role of government and how it necessarily affects the economy. So what does the government do in order to give us the framework within which an economy can operate? So in order to explain that, I'm going to explain different types of systems of economic organization, and then I'll explain different types of governance and how they interact. And I'll keep it really simple. I'm putting a lot of definitions on Canvas now. You guys asked me if I could write down my definitions and give them to you. Now, I don't like doing that. I actually do not. I think it's better for you guys to take notes and determine for yourselves what's important information to remember and what isn't. And the reason why is because whenever I don't want to sound like I'm some sort of like condescending gatekeeper, but when you go into a job and you need to take notes at your job, there may not necessarily be somebody telling you what to remember, but you got to be able to pick and choose what's important. Note taking is a bit of a skill, and I'm trying to help you guys get better at that. That's actually why I don't usually give definitions. However, I understand we're in college and you guys have a lot to remember in our lectures, and so I've been posting the definitions on Canvas. So after I'm done today, I'll upload our definitions for the day, and you guys can take a look and just use the Canvas module to see what the definitions are. You don't need to write them anymore. But I encourage you to don't misunderstand me. Taking notes is important because I don't cover everything always very clearly, and so it's helpful if you have notes that you can refer back to, because some stuff might be a little bit different. I might not have everything in our definitions section. I'm going to try to record everything that I think is important, but ultimately it is up to you to determine what is worth remembering for yourself. Make sense? Not too harsh, right? So anyway, when we're talking about the role of government, we have to understand how an economy is organized, okay? Do you know what capitalism is? Have you ever heard of capitalism before?
Yeah.
And you have a vague idea for what it is? So
Well, no, I don't.
okay.
But yeah.
No, it's okay. Okay, that's okay. Don't worry about it. So we have this idea that capitalism is like a system of governance, right? Has anybody ever heard that before? Let me tell you something. Capitalism is often confused with democracy, and they're not related at all. Democracy is a system of governance. It's a form of governance. It's a system of organization. Democracy means governance by the people. Everybody has a say in everything. It's like there's this notion of something called a referendum. And basically, in a democracy, everybody votes all the time for what they want the government to do. Everybody's part of the government. They hold referendums, which are just elections, but instead of electing a politician, a referendum just asks a question, and then everybody says what they think that the government should do about that question, and then that's what the government does. They count up the votes and they say 51% of people wanted to introduce wolves to Colorado and 49% did not. So we'll introduce wolves to Colorado. The people have spoken. So that's a referendum. And that's democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We don't. We live in what's often characterized as a democracy, but really, we live in a representative republic. So in the United States, we elect officials, we vote and elect officials who represent us, and they make the governmental decisions on our behalf. So it's a little bit different. Capitalism is simply a framework. That's it. All capitalism means is that within an economy, people are free to exchange their goods and services with each other as they see fit. The only way that I can make any money in a capitalist society is by creating a business or by doing something, by providing a good or service that makes somebody else so happy that they give me their money voluntarily in exchange for what I have. I'll say it a different way. If I have something that you want and you have something that I want, and one of us happens to have money, that's what the other person wants, and we make an exchange, we're both better off for it. All right. And that's really how economies grow and flourish and prosper, is when people have uninhibited trade with each other. They can trade and they can maximize the value that they get for all the things that they have, and they can explore how to use resources more efficiently to create even more value. What I just explained in that sentence is known as innovation. They innovate, try to make new things in order to make more money. Because I say it all the time, what's better than money? More money, right? Cardi B agrees with me. So that's the idea, right? That's capitalism. It is not tied at all to colonialism. There's nothing at all ideological about capitalism. There's nothing attached to it at all about governance. All it is just a method of economic organization, insofar as you could call it a method of organization. It's just a lack of organization and a lack of barriers, if you will, to trade, right? That's all capitalism is. That is it in its pure sense. Now, we don't always get that in the world, especially in our country here in the United States. We don't always get pure capitalism. There's always going to be government intervention on some scale, which I will explain in a moment. But pure capitalism is hard to find if it exists at all. There's always going to be a government, and in some cases that's a good thing. We need it. In most cases, I don't think we do, but I leave that up to you guys. So let me back up a second. I have another class that I teach, and it's actually in person. So I have my students gather around and they all debate with each other about what they think is right. And then we share with each other what we think. Everybody groups up and we all talk about what we think would be the appropriate level of governance. How much government do we need in a society? But we can't do that here because it's me and Ryan and you guys at home and most of the folks in this class, they stay at home and watch these lectures later. So it's a bit awkward to have these kind of things. There's no group work in this class for that reason. So we can talk as much as you want, but unfortunately, it's not going to matter a whole lot. So we'll save our opinions. If you do have an opinion about the role of government, feel free to chime in with it. But otherwise, I'm just going to explain and move on and try to keep my opinions out of it. Okay, try to keep my opinions out of our discussion personally. But you're free to contribute yours. So what I'm saying is that on the opposite side of capitalism, this allowance of free trade is restricted trade. Trade is limited. But why would somebody want to limit trade? Why would that ever be something that is incentivized? Why would anybody ever want to say to two people, you cannot trade with each other. You cannot make the decisions that you're making? And the answer lies in the role of government. All right. So we have government. Originally, right after our friend Ooga Booga got his PhD and governments were starting to form together, people started asking this question, what do we need them for? What is the basic function of government? And in its most basic sense, that function is to protect the people. Groups of people got together a long time ago, and they were in danger. There were dangers everywhere. Groups of people attacked each other, tribes raided villages, and wars were fought between armies that attacked smaller kingdoms that couldn't defend themselves. And so folks had this idea. They said, you know what? We need to figure out a way to protect ourselves. We need to figure out something that we can do in order to make our society prosperous. And so they came up with the idea of a government, a group of officials that lead the country, that dominate the country politically, but also make decisions on behalf of the citizens, voluntarily or not. Maybe the citizens appointed them, maybe the citizens elected them, maybe they stole power, maybe they cheated and lied and got their way to the top. Doesn't matter. Government exists at the top of the social hierarchy to control the political process of the country, most importantly, but also to protect the people. That's the idea. All right. Now, it's always been hotly debated what that necessarily means. Some people will say that you don't really need a government to do much protecting other than maybe providing an army and protecting the property rights of the people that you find in a country. Maybe providing a good judicial system that doesn't really work very well whenever there's competition, making sure that laws are fairly and duly enforced, and that the people are protected from third-party interferences and externalities, right? That's a good idea for government. That's a pretty libertarian view. Other people might say that us folks in the economy don't do a very good job at regulating ourselves. And so we need a lot of protections and regulations in order to make sure the economy maximizes its potential. Other people might say that we need to protect the environment. And so the government should step in and prevent certain groups of people from developing land whenever it should be used to, I guess, be preserved, when it should be preserved, something like that. People say that healthcare is a universal right and that the government should step in and provide healthcare to everybody because it's their job to protect the people. How does that not count? Other people might say healthcare is a service and therefore a service should be provided in a marketplace and the product would be better overall, and we don't need the government to do that. So as I'm explaining this to you, it should be obvious that it is difficult to really find a consensus on what the right amount of government is. So I've got my ideas, but I'm not going to include my opinions too much here. I'm just explaining to you that when you have something that is contrary to capitalism, you have a free market, you have a restricted market, you have a highly regulated market, or a regulated market, if you will. It doesn't have to be highly regulated. But this is the notion of what we call socialism, okay? And socialism is kind of like a catch-all term. It's a bit of a misnomer, I think. It's kind of misleading. It's like this. The actual strict economic definition of socialism is public, which means government, public ownership of the means of production of goods and services. So businesses, government controls what businesses can do what, government allocates resources as they think they should be allocated. But in reality, so that's the economic definition, but in reality, all socialism is it's a manifestation of this idea. It's a manifestation of the idea that somebody else who is not you is making decisions for you on your behalf. It's like I told you at the beginning of the semester, I cannot go to the store and buy incandescent light bulbs anymore. And the reason why is because it is illegal. It is no longer legal to do that because the government made it illegal. It's not illegal because it was like not interesting to people. You know, there's probably a market for incandescent lights, I would imagine, if they had existed for 100 years. But like I said at the beginning of the semester, President Obama and his friends at the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, came together and agreed that this was bad for the environment. So they made incandescent light bulbs illegal. So you cannot buy them. Now, whether or not you agree with that doesn't really matter. What matters is the fact that you can't buy them. It was a decision that was made for you by somebody else. And so that's the idea, right? So I'm not saying that everything that happens in this country is socialist. I'm saying that socialism is that manifestation of decision making in the central government or in the state government. But in reality, here in the United States, we have a strong central government. I'm talking specifically about the idea that it's a government agency making decisions for you. Because governments lead society, they control the political processes in society, they dominate society, right? They dominate the decision making. So that's the idea. Socialism is, like I said, it's kind of like a huge basket. Some people call it like, what they actually confuse with socialism is something called redistributionism, where the government taxes people a lot and then takes that tax money and redistributes it to different parts of the economy to make sure everybody kind of makes the same amount of money. So that's redistributionism. We have heavy government intervention or nationalization, ownership of the means of production, which means that the government itself will become a majority stakeholder or outright control businesses that operate in the economy. Like China has its own airline. The country of China has an airline. Okay, the United States doesn't have an airline. All right, it's all open market. So that's the idea, right? So we have, on the one hand, we have free markets, and on the other hand, we have regulated markets. And that's about as clear as I can explain. That's generally what you find in the world, right? You gotta get two choices when it comes to being an economic agent or acting on behalf of yourself in the economy. You can either make your own choices or somebody else is going to make them for you. And that's what you find, okay? So I'm going to take a second. You guys can catch up with your notes while I take a drink. But for right now, just remember that on the one hand, we have free markets, and on the other hand, we have essentially everything else, not free markets. Socialism is that manifestation. It's where somebody else makes your decisions for you. Make sense? All right. I was asked today what the difference is between socialism and communism. All right. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. This is not a political science class, but I will explain the difference between the two because communism is pretty prominent in our nation's history. Our arch nemesis for about 70 years, particularly the 45 years after the end of the Cold War, was the Soviet Union, which was a communist country. In fact, communism was first implemented by the Bolsheviks who formed the Soviet Union in 1923, I believe. So anyway, the difference between the two is like this. When I'm talking about socialism in this class, I'm talking about the economic stuff. But socialism kind of also is like a political idea. Like a socialist country is a country where the government controls a lot of things. Now, the level that they control varies, but it's always a lot. They always control a lot of the things that people do, right? So communist countries are pretty similar, but the ideology is a bit different, okay? Socialist countries have been around forever because the governments in all kinds of countries have always controlled a lot of the decisions that people make. In medieval and ancient history, we had like feudalism. Feudal lords basically tell peasants how much they want them to produce. In modern days, we don't have the feudal lords anymore. We have like state planners in countries like Denmark and stuff like that, for example. But the idea is not really any different. In fact, The United States and other capitalist countries similar to ours are pretty rare to find around the world today. It's pretty hard to find free countries around the world today. And when you compare our country to the rest of human history, it becomes even harder to find free countries, right? And it's the instance of true economic freedom is very rare, actually. So basically, throughout most of history, we had socialism. Although in its modern ideological incarnation, socialism sort of gained prominence at the tail end of the 1800s, and it was really popular in the 1900s. Now, I encourage you guys, if you want to learn more about socialism, to read that book I put on our Canvas page, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, and go to the chapters that deal with government because it's all right there. So I would recommend you do if you're interested in learning more. But essentially, socialism as an ideology gained a lot of traction in the 20th century. However, socialism in the world, especially in the Western world, lost a lot of ground in the 1980s when two folks took power in the US and in the UK. So Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States in the 1980s. He was a very strong supporter of the free market. Same thing with Margaret Thatcher, who was the prime minister of the United Kingdom for like 13 years, mostly in the 80s. So owing to those two and a few others, economic activity was largely freed up after the 1980s. You had huge expansions in the economies of places like China and India. And in fact, in China, since the 80s, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of abject poverty. Truly, it's crazy. It's like truly crazy. Like you look at a map of Africa and a map of China, and you compare GDPs before and after the 80s, and like most of Africa had a better standard of living and a higher GDP than places in China before this. But afterwards, now China's a very nice place to live, mostly. It's interesting. So the idea behind socialism is government organization of a society. Now, this is why I think that socialism kind of has two in forms. It has the economic form and it has the political form. Capitalism doesn't, but a lot of people think it does. A lot of people think it's synonymous with democracy or a republic, but it's not. Communism, on the other hand, exists as this weird form of socialism that's kind of its own deal. So in communist countries, the government controls everything. They don't just control the means of production, they control all of the natural resources in a country. And so the idea for a communist nation is that all of the leadership class of a country is eliminated and replaced just with collective ownership, which means everybody owns everything. Now, this is an ideology that was drummed up by two fellows in the 1800s. Their names were Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And so they came up with this idea that capitalist societies eventually decay. So what you start out with is capitalism that gives way to huge amounts of disparities in wealth, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And Mr. Marx and Mr. Engels, more specifically Mr. Marx, classified the rich as this group of people known as the bourgeoisie. They were very wealthy. And they classified the poor as the working class or the proletariat. That's what they called them. And so the proletariat, they surmised, would eventually rise up in revolution and overthrow the bourgeoisie. And here's the rub. Mr. Marx said that they would not replace the bourgeoisie with any new bourgeoisie. They would just simply rule themselves, and everybody would somehow pinky swear that they wouldn't change anything. It would just be fun, right? But that's not how it happens. Societies always are stratified. They can never not be. In every instance of human society that we've ever studied in this world, human beings have always organized themselves into hierarchies. Why is that? Well, it's like I said, nobody's equal to each other. Even me, at this point, I'm not equal to myself 10 years ago or 10 years from now or 10 years hence after that. Okay. So people always have different amounts of skills, and those skills can also be political skills. And so different people with different political skills rise to different levels in the society. And so what happens is that the idea is that you abolish the bourgeoisie and that there's no more oppression. That was the main idea, right? We want to get rid of all of this societal oppression and this nasty business where people are sort of controlled and dominated by the bourgeoisie. That doesn't happen. What happens is that there's always going to be a new class of leaders that replaces the old one. They're just waiting in line, right? That's what happened in the Soviet Union. That's what happened in China. That's what happens all over the world whenever we have communist ideologies that become implemented as forms of government. Okay, so that's communism in a nutshell. It's not a political science class, but it's worth explaining because communist countries nowadays are mostly communist in name. Like, for example, China. You think of China as very, very, very much so a communist country where everybody shares in collective ownership. But that's not true. China is one of the most privatized countries in the world, meaning that they have very strong notions of property rights and personal property ownership, which I will explain before we finish today. But it's like they're communist in name. They are communists, but they don't have the same sort of socialist economic structure that other communist countries either had or were said to have had in the past, or they would say that they wish they had, because that's the pure ideological incarnation of communism as it's manifested in the form of a government. So it doesn't really work out the way that Mr. Marx thought, I guess. Now, maybe it would be nice if we lived in a place where everybody just shared stuff and everybody got along, but like I said, we don't get the world the way we would like it to be. We get the world the way it is. And so the world the way it is that we have to find a way to allocate our resources. And like I said, it kind of goes against everything I've been teaching you, right? Because resource allocation, the proper distribution of resources, has to be done with the price system if you want to do it efficiently. Everything else is inefficient because nobody in a government can possibly know all the ins and outs of an economy for their people. Even between the two of us, there's no way that I could possibly know everything that would benefit you. There's no way that you could possibly know everything that would benefit me. And so that's why you have to have a free market in order to build wealth. And anytime you have any sort of socialist arrangement, what you're actually doing is you're rearranging and dominating and controlling the wealth that people have already created when they had access to their own freedom of choice. So that gives rise now to the question, that begs the question, what is the role of government? Okay. What would be the proper amount of government in a society? On the one hand, we have total, complete freedom, lack of a government. They still have to protect us. Somehow they do that, but we have total economic freedom. And on the other hand, we have the government making decisions on our behalf, doing everything for us. So what is the answer? So that's what we're trying to explore today. My personal opinion is that you don't really need much. You need to have strong property rights. You need to have a very strong system of property protection in order to build wealth. See, the thing about markets, and I mentioned this, I think, on the first day of class, is that they have been in existence for thousands of years. Markets are not new, all right? It's not like we just drummed these up whenever we created the country at the tail end of the 1700s. This is something that's been in existence for centuries. And you can look at merchants from ancient Judea and ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon and Assyria many thousands of years ago. All right. The Mycenaeans were trading with each other in markets 10,000 years ago. It's crazy, right? So markets are not new, but the prosperity associated with markets is actually very new. So that's only something that's occurred in the last 150 or so years, maybe a little bit more. But you see this huge growth in economic prosperity kind of starting after the 1860s, 1870s in this modern era. Part of that has to do with the access now that people had to cheap energy. So like oil has discovered, and the first oil well was drilled in Pennsylvania, not that far from where I was from. But basically, cheap energy really made trade between people very cheap and easy. And so there was a lot of trade going on, and that helped grow the population. And when the population grows, you have increases in the amount of people who can do labor. And when you have increases in the amount of people who can do labor, you have more innovation that comes along. We have more competition, things like that. It's a good effect. When the population grows and fills up the amount of space that a country occupies, prosperity follows, because that population growing creates a need for more jobs. It creates a need for more resources. It creates a need to be filled with companies that compete against each other. And a byproduct of that competition is innovation. Now, it's not always true, right? Growing populations can be a problem if the economy is mismanaged. But the thing that made it work here in the West is that we had a good framework for legal property protection. Now, private property, again, I'll encourage you to read basic economics, but private property is very important. It's very important actually for the poor people of our country and the world. But what it is basically the government is respecting the stuff that you own. Private property doesn't just mean your land. It means my pencil, it means my notebook, it means everything that I own. The government is not going to come in and confiscate my stuff and not compensate me for that. So they're not going to just take my stuff and give me some money in exchange. They're going to leave me alone. And now what happens is that I have the ability to take what I have and use it to try to make more money because that's the name of the game. I want to make more money. So I'm going to use my resources that I have ownership of, and I'm going to try to maximize their value. And in doing so, it's possible and probable that I'll discover some new way to make everybody's life better. Because now, remember what I said, in a capitalist society, the only way that I can make any money is by making you happy enough to give me your money. Okay. So I've got to figure out ways to do that. I've got to use my resources wisely and figure out new innovative ways to create new things. However, if property rights are not really well protected, if Ryan could come over here and steal my pen before I'm about to make a crazy new invention with it, then the world doesn't get the benefits of my new invention. And sorry, folks, we're out of luck, right? Government is really good for stepping in and putting Ryan in jail. I'm sorry, putting Ryan in jail for stealing my stuff. And that's how you protect people's property rights, is you enforce the protection of people in the society against these externalities, these things that they didn't agree to. Okay, you put murderers in jail because nobody agrees to get murdered, right? You put thieves in jail because they're destroying wealth. They steal stuff unfairly and it degrades the society overall. That is why when the Western Roman Empire fell in 479, the people were out of luck because they didn't have a government policing anybody anymore. They didn't have anybody protecting them from thieves, from raiders, from barbarians. The Vandals, the Goths, the Alans, that's the name of people, A-L-A-N, Alan. The Cumans, they were coming in Eastern and Western Europe and raiding and destroying what the Romans had built. And there was no Roman army anymore to protect them, right? Interesting stuff, huh? So that is, in a nutshell, the idea of basic property rights and property protection. And you have to have it. If you don't have property protection, if you don't have a strong institution that protects your property, if you don't have a strong set of institutions that the government uses to protect the people, then you cannot build wealth very well. And your economy lags behind because of it. That's kind of why I said that here in America, we're kind of lucky that we have not only markets, which have existed forever, but we have a good legal mix. We have a good recipe for using our laws to protect people. Now, sometimes the government gets a little carried away and they overregulate. They make the barriers too high to do business. That's something like Iceland. So Iceland's not bad if you live there, but if I'm a foreigner and I'm visiting Iceland, that's hard for me to buy anything because I have to pay a foreigner's tax. Now, Iceland, they've restricted their taxes on foreigners who are tourists because they want people to come to their island and spend money. So they understand that if they lower the barrier to people coming to their island, then people will do it more. Now, Iceland's a beautiful place, so if you want to go there and spend some money, that's good, but you're not going to do it if it's too expensive. So they try to lower the price as much as they can get away with. But government still has to collect taxes, right? And so they tax businesses. They have to. That's what they do in order to keep themselves funded. Governments don't make any money. They're not a business. They don't sell computers. They don't sell pens. They don't give massages. No, they govern the country. And that's not something that anybody pays for. The government basically makes you pay. They make you pay taxes. Cool arrangement, right? You get born here, you pay taxes, and the government says, if you don't pay taxes, if you don't give us what you owe, then we're going to send you to jail. They do it by force, right? And they use that money under the promise that they're going to basically maximize their own utility. They're going to make our society better. They're going to help the United States or whatever country we're talking about be the best possible version of itself that it can be. It's not always the case. Governments suffer from one really devastating thing that causes a lot of problems, and that is corruption. Corruption's not good. Whenever you have a government agent using his or her power and influence to act outside of the law, we would call that corruption. We call that an instance of corruption. When the government abuses its authority and takes advantage of the people, they themselves become the instigator of an externality, meaning that they unfairly treat the citizens and the citizens lose out for it. If I were in the 1990s wanted to go to college in Russia, I would have had to pay between $10,000 and $15,000 in bribes just to get accepted to a good school. All right. And in Russia, they don't use dollars, they use rubles, but the idea is the same, the equivalency of 10 to 15 grand. So in Russia, they had a weaker purchasing power. That's a lot of rubles, okay? A lot of money. And Russia in the 1990s was very poor, okay? So that's tough, right? It pulls money out of the economy and it reduces the efficiency that people have in order to do anything. But that's not necessarily the worst, because still you can survive whenever the government is a little bit corrupt, right? You're just paying, and then the government that you pay the money to, they go and spend the money on other things, and it's fine, right? But it's not fine. And the reason why is not because of the monetary cost. Yes, that's painful. But actually, the reason why corruption is so bad is because of the opportunity cost. It's not the monetary cost that's bad about corruption. It's that the money that you could spend on anything else, you're forced to spend on a corrupt official, on a bribe, or you have your money plundered by the state. Legal plunder is that notion. So it's not good. There's a high opportunity cost with this kind of stuff. Because I said, the government doesn't make any money. They take it. They have to. The government is full of people that have their own points of view. And if they are bribing, or if they're accepting bribes, rather, they are taking away from the economy. Now, at the beginning of the semester, I did say that when I'm talking about the government, I'm not actually talking about the government itself as a decision-making entity. I am talking about the people in the government. That's not what I mean. I'm not saying that the government itself makes decisions, because it cannot. People make decisions. People are the only thing that make decisions in this world. So when I say government, I am actually referring to the people in the government. It's just a shorthand way of saying that. So that's what I mean. Make sense? I could talk a lot more, but it's 6:43, which means that we're about to wrap up. And I feel like I've covered a lot, and I think I talked a little bit fast today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause our lecture there. I would encourage you guys to explore the role of government on your own. And then when we have class on Wednesday, we can share our opinions. So feel free to do so. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to say. Do you guys have any questions? You good, Ryan? All good. All right. And we'll call it there, okay? So thank you, everybody, for joining me, and I will see you on Wednesday. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Professor.
Take care. Thank you.